are on a mulligan to 6 this game. Not super determinative in this matchup. I mean, obviously you want to start with your full 7. It's important in Standard, but both these decks can bear a mulligan.
Funny thing about mono blue aggro is that if you have a 1-drop into Curious Obsession and a way to protect it, you're going to be seeing a ton of cards anyway.
Well, here's step 1 of that, a 1-drop. It looks like a Pteramander from Bernal. Meanwhile, Edgar just going to fire back with a tapped Godless Shrine. Let's see if Bernal can complete the combo here. That's a tap. That's a Curious Obsession. Here comes Pteramander in for 2 damage, and it'll take a card. Why not?
And potentially slow rolling the second islands.
There it is.
Ooh.
And it's coming along with another Pteramander, so shield's a little bit down here.
Yeah, tapping out, risking the cast down or Moment of Craving from Edgar, but...
And Edgar has it. There's the cast down, taking out that Pteramander. I wonder if there's a second copy of Curious Obsession in hand. Nope, just going to get in with that Pteramander.
I think it makes sense because even if you're on Edgar's side, you still have to fire it off.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There's not a whole lot of use bluffing here
No.
because it's just going to die anyway, so you might as well play the second Pteramander and ensure that if you do draw another Curious Obsession, you get to connect with it.
I agree. I think that was a fine way to play that spot. And I think this is also a fine play. You see end of turn Merfolk Trickster. Edgar has the Absorb, going to go ahead and counter that, gain a little bit of life, pad the life total. Back on Bernal's side now. Here comes the third island.
The counterspells are a little awkward in this matchup because the mono blue aggro deck has a lot of different ways to actually help play around them. So I like Edgar actually just firing off an Absorb here.
Yeah, very fair point. It's tough to get maximum value. And there you see main deck Surge Mare from Joe Bernal. It's a card we talked about a little bit on our podcast this past week, possibly creeping back into main decks in best of 1. But here you see it in the main deck in regular best of 3.
It's a serviceable threat, but also just very good on defense, which this deck is really lacking in a lot of ways to actually play defense against mono red and mono white. And 2 copies in Joe's deck, no copies of Mistcloak Herald.
This is actually the way I built this deck when I first started playing Mono Blue. I am a fan of Surge Mare. You haven't lived until you put a Curious Obsession on your Surge Mare, let me tell you.
It is nice.
Mm-hmm. Here you see just a regular attack from the Surge Mare. It is going to be pumped up to a 2-3, so doing a little bit of damage. Edgar going to go ahead and throw a cast down at that Surge Mare, get it off the battlefield.
Pretty good hand for Edgar so far in the matchup. He missed his 4th land drop, but having 2 2-mana removal spells is about as much as you can ask for here and has slowed Joe down a lot.
And there is a Cry of the Canarium just cleaning up that last creature on the battlefield. Kind of oddly off to the side now.
You just put that exile pile anywhere.
Yeah, why not? Good follow-up here for Joe. He has the Tempest Djinn. Meanwhile, Edgar going to go ahead and fire off a Thought Erasure. Let's see if that's going to resolve. All right, straightening up the exile. It is. And it looks like it's going to grab a Wizard's Retort, send that to the graveyard, leaving Joe with only an Essence Capture in hand. Edgar going to bin a second copy of Thought Erasure and pass the turn back to Joe. Joe going to get in a big attack here. 5 damage from the Tempest Djinn, bringing Edgar down to 11. Any follow-up from Joe? Let's see. Nope, just going to pass the turn back.
So Essence Capture, obviously pretty dead in this matchup. No creatures on Edgar's side, so Edgar's got to feel pretty good about that. And then Joe had to play out the 5th island to get an extra attack in or an extra damage in with the Tempest Djinn. So Edgar's just free to resolve Teferi here, and this might be it.
Yeah, he was very happy to hop on that opening. Going to follow up with Search for Escanta, another land, and this is where the game starts to get away from the mono blue player. This is a tough spot to come back from. Joe agrees. Going to go ahead and scoop him up. Doesn't want to sit around messing with Teferi shenanigans for another 10 minutes. It's going to head to game 2. This is, of course, an extremely, extremely close matchup. If you talk to both sides, I've heard them both say that they're favored in the matchup, and that probably means it's much closer to a 50-50 than either side wants to admit.
No, I think Esper's a little bit of a favorite, actually, and I was of the reverse position going into the MC. I thought, like, from my experience testing the matchup even, it seemed like Mono Blue had a huge advantage, but a few little tweaks here and there, people get used to actually playing the matchup, because we talked about that a lot before, where Mono Blue is very difficult to play against, and it was mostly a fringe deck, so until people actually had a reason to get the reps in, it was understandable why games were being won a little bit easier from the mono blue side. But now people are ready. They have a good sideboard plan and everything. And mono blue didn't really get a whole lot added to it past that, because there's just not a whole lot you can do when you're a mono-colored deck.
Right. I think you're spot on. The play patterns and the familiarity with them is so key in bringing this matchup more in line with Esper being favored. I remember just like playing this matchup repeatedly and feeling really favored from the mono blue side. And then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, my opponents do something wrong in every game we play. And once they started to get those leaks out of their game, the matchup got a lot tighter,
Yeah, and normally once you're in that situation from the mono blue side, you'd be like, oh, okay, I actually do need help in this matchup. I need to have some extra sideboard cards. But really, there isn't a whole lot you can do.
Well, speaking of sideboards, why don't we go ahead and take a look now? We'll start on the mono blue side. Why not, since we were just talking about it? You see Joe Bernal has access to 3 negates, 3 copies of Entrancing Melody, 1 Spell Pierce, 2 Essence Captures, 2 more Surge Mares, 2 Disdainful Strokes, and 2 Deep Freeze. Jerry, what do you like in this matchup?
Obviously, the counter spells are good. Negate, Spell Pierce, Disdainful Stroke are things that you're going to want. It's kind of weird because Esper normally has this transformational creature sideboard plan against mono blue where they bring in Thief of Sanity and Hostage Taker, and that is basically how the Esper deck is going to try and win in postboard games. So I'm not sure if Joe is going to keep in the Essence Captures or go to something like Entrancing Melody as kind of a hedge, but if not, he certainly runs the risk of losing to those creatures.
I think you're spot on. It's always a difficult assessment to make how much you want to prepare for Esper Control's creatures. Speaking of those creatures, let's look at Edgar's sideboard. You see 4 copies of Thief of Sanity, 3 copies of Duress, 3 Hostage Takers, 2 Moment of Cravings, 1 Lyra Dawnbringer, 1 Negate, and finally 1 Vona Butcher of Magan. You ever play with that card?
I've tried before.
I've had some good experiences with it.
I have not.
Okay.
It's weird because it's occupying the Obstinate Baloth, locks it on Hierarch slot, but if they just end up keeping in Lava Coil expecting like Basilica Bellhaunt or something, it still just gets tagged. But Edgar's in a good spot here, being up a game and also having 14, I think, sideboard cards to bring in. I would not bring in the Vona here.
Okay.
The ground creature, not super relevant, and the games are going to be more about who gets the bigger advantage, the bigger lead. So if Joe is drawing cards off Curious Obsession, or if Edgar's drawing cards with Chemister's Insight, stuff like that, that's what it's going to come down to, is resources mostly. And Vona doesn't really help with that. Although, Joe is eventually going to kill him with damage. Just the life doesn't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. So Thief of Sanity and Hostage Taker we talked about a little bit as being very powerful in the matchup, and then you have Duress to be able to force them through. You have Moment of Craving as additional removal. Lyra is just a powerhouse, mostly because it's a flying first striker.
Right.
So it's just impossible to attack through, and then the extra negate for winning counter wars.
As interesting as Game 1 is in this matchup, typically, I'll admit that Game 1 was kind of one-sided, but usually it's a very intricate matchup. Game 2 and 3 are even better, and as both decks shift a little bit, prepare for each other's plans, it gets really interesting. If you want to experience the thrill of playing these matchups, Esper Control versus Mono Blue Aggro, but you're missing some cards, why not check out the spring sale? Head over to go.starcitygames.com/sale. Different cards popping up all the time if you're in need of that last Volcanic Island for your Legacy deck. Maybe a Domri Chaos Bringer for Gruul. Jerry, I know you're a big Gruul fan, often praising that deck. Why not grab some Domris, get ready to go?
I'm more excited about that Japanese Brainstorm.
Okay. Yeah, you're a big fan of the Japanese cards, of course.
Look at it.
It's beautiful.
It looks so pretty.
I agree. Beautiful looking card. So why not check out the spring sale over at go.starcitygames.com/sale. Players are now peeling some cards off the top of their library, getting ready to look at their opening 7. I have played this matchup a bunch, and it's just good, fun, old-fashioned Magic. So many decisions on both sides. I hope we're in for a good game here. Joe going to go ahead and lead on Island. Edgar, tapped land, passes back to Joe. Still no action, and this is typical of these games. They slow down quite a bit in postboard games on both sides. Obviously, Esper Control already slow, but Mono Blue Aggro takes a step back as well and kind of stems its aggression a little bit.
So with Joe not playing anything on the first couple turns, you got to assume that he has a lot of reactive stuff in hand.
Yep.
Probably a lot of counter spells. I'm sure Edgar does not expect this Thought Erasure to resolve or anything. But you got to do something.
Oh, yeah.
Cast your spells.
Can't just sit there forever. Let's see what the play is here from Joe. It is Tempest Djinn, the most powerful creature in the deck, at least in terms of just stats. I certainly have made a case that sometimes Tempest Djinn feels a little icky in comparison to the rest of the really lithe cards you have that are capable of doing so many things. Tempest Djinn, just a beater. Kind of indispensable, though.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. It's also interesting that most people advocate taking out Tempest in this matchup.
Correct. Joe apparently does not agree. Going to leave it in.
I mean, if you're loading up on counterspells, the best thing you can possibly do is protect a giant threat with it, right? But at the same time, it requires 3 mana on your main phase. The deck only has 20 islands, which is a fairly low land count, so setting that up can be kind of difficult, actually.
I think that's true. We do have our first result from one of our other matches. You see Andrew Tenjum up a game against Matthew Dilks in the Death and Taxes versus Golgari Depths matchup. Very interesting matchup there. Meanwhile, over in the Modern match, we do have our first game result. Daryl Ayers on Amulet Titan taking a game over Matthew Hoey on Is It Phoenix.
Not surprising, right?
Not surprising, although we did see Amulet Titan kind of get run down by Is It Phoenix in one of our matches as well. So
yeah, I mean, that was against Pete Ingram, and Pete is very lucky.
Okay.
So
as long as we know why Pete's winning.
Some skill involved.
Love you, Peter. I'm sure we'll see that team again doing very well thus far.
So Joe Bernal just lets this Thought Erasure resolve despite having a Wizard's Retort in his hand because
Wants to use his mana.
Yeah, he's going to try getting a little aggressive, flashing this Trickster. He knows that at this point he does not have an engine. He can't assemble Curious Obsession plus a creature plus protection, so it is now down to damage.
Look who it is.
I was wrong.
Vona, Butcher of Magan, is going to eat a counterspell. Joe says, I cannot beat that card presently.
Maybe all 15 came in then.
It's quite possible. I'm not sure what you don't want out of this sideboard. So
I thought it was Vona.
Well, Edgar does not agree in this spot. There's Lyra. We knew that was coming in. And that is going to stick. Maybe the Vona is just there to be bait, so Lyra can go ahead and stick.
Entirely possible. And this one might just be over. This might be Lyra running away with the game.
It does often do that. Let's see. Edgar has a follow-up search for Escanta.
With these big giant flyers, you got to be a little careful about Merfolk Trickster. Could potentially see a triple block happening after the Lyra attacks and Trickster remove all the abilities, but...
And Edgar is going to play around that here, just leaving the Lyra back on defense, but has a super, super powerful follow-up in Thief of Sanity. And honestly, when the Esper deck started leaning on Thief of Sanity, I feel like that's when this matchup really started to turn in Esper's favor. For a long time, I think people were of the opinion like, oh, it'll get brick walled. There's a lot of flyers in the matchup. But its effect when it is able to connect is so, so dramatic. It's worth it. It's worth finding a way to make your Thief of Sanity work for you on the Esper side.
Yeah, the ceiling is insane. It's effectively a 3-mana Teferi, right? Like, all you want to do in the matchup is kill all of their things and then play a threat that gives you an advantage.
Yeah.
And both Teferi and Thief of Sanity do that, except the floor for Thief of Sanity is that it just blocks all the one mana 1/1 flyers.
And that's entirely acceptable for sure. And sometimes you just have those hands where you lead on Thief of Sanity, you connect, you find your opponent's counterspell, and then they never do anything for the rest of the game as your Thief of Sanity beats them to death slowly.
Oh, yeah.
And you see Joe with kind of a defeated look on his face as he just passes the turn back. Kaya's Wrath, not going to need that one when you have a board of Thief of Sanity and Lyra. It's going to go ahead and head to the graveyard.
So Joe has Terramander, 5 lands, and enough mana to adapt it. And Edgar knows that his last card in hand is a Spell Pierce. So Edgar is free to attack this turn, even though he didn't feel like he was able to last turn. Or at least attack with the Lyra this turn. Attacking Thief into the Terramander might not be great, but...
Edgar's just going to play it slow. Go ahead and pass the turn back to Joe, it looks like. And Joe is going to go ahead and activate that Terramander.
I mean, also acceptable. If you attack with Lyra, you're taking a hit back for 9. Which is effectively 4. So you're trading 5 for 4 damage. And Edgar with Active Search and...
Just such a strong battlefield position. No real onus on Edgar to do anything, I don't think.
Right.
Something has to go very wrong for Edgar to fall behind at this point. See binning Thief of Sanity there. As soon as that search goes online, the advantage is going to snowball very quickly for Edgar.
Yeah, we don't have an advantage bar or anything, but...
It would be pushed pretty far to the left right now if we did.
It would. We see Pete Ingram in the background there. Sorry, Pete.
Pete finding a way to get involved in this match as well.
He heard us talking about him. He
Maybe
knew.
maybe he's trying to lend Matthew Hoey some of his luck as a fellow Is It Phoenix player. Down a game against Daryl Ayers right now, could certainly use it. And looking like Edgar might go ahead and cement this one for his team. Not done yet.
It's looking good, but Mono Blue is very tricksy.
It can find its way out of a lot of weird spots.
But I do think that Edgar is a very calculated player. He knows that he's ahead right now, and he's just thinking about the various different draw steps that Joe Bernal could come up with to actually get him out of it. And he's going to try and play around everything. He always does.
He does, and now he's ready to go ahead and get in with Lyra. Going to do 5 damage, gain 5 life. Life total swing 17 to 15.
Which, if you're on Joe's side, you know that this means something has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Edgar drew a card that is relevant.
Let's see what it is. Edgar shuffling a few cards around. It is Cry of the Carnarium. Interesting play there.
So,
Eating his own Thief, cleaning up those 2 Merfolk Tricksters.
So, you trade Cry and Thief for 2 Tricksters, which on its face doesn't seem good, but I think Edgar decided that a lot of the stuff that Joe could come up with that could actually get him out of this are very, very punishing if those 2 Tricksters stay around, right?
Yeah, that might be about making sure this search flips here. I don't know. Interesting spot. I think it's one of those things where Edgar is kind of far enough ahead that it won't matter all that much, and it's just clean. It kind of, like you said, closes down a lot of outs for Joe.
Right. And Edgar's still sitting on Akaya's Wrath. So if he ends up needing another sweeper, he has access to it.
Absolutely. There you see Joe does have the counter magic for the cast down on the Terramander. Passes the turn back to Edgar. Going to go ahead and get us Azcanta the Sunken Ruin activation, and it's going to find a Thought Erasure. That'll help whatever Edgar wants to do next succeed. Although he doesn't have to do much, just keep attacking with that Lyra. That'll carry the day from this point.
Yeah, so Lyra is effectively dealing 5 and just fogging Joe's attack every single turn. Meanwhile, Edgar is going to try and play multiple spells in a turn or play a spell and activate Azcanta. Either way, he's just going to further and further cement his advantage.
Yep, pulling further ahead with each passing turn. That's the effect that Azcanta the Sunken Ruin has in the game. Edgar going to go ahead and try Duress here. It looks like we're going to see a negate in response. Edgar says no problem. That does accomplish something. If Edgar doesn't have another land in hand, it'll shut off an Azcanta activation for this turn. If Edgar wants to Thought Erasure, he does not.
Well, he knows Joe's last card is a Spell Pierce still.
Okay, nothing to worry about there. More than happy to let Joe hang on to that one. Here comes Terramander again, bringing Edgar back down to 12. Must mean Joe has something here. It's a blocker, Siren Storm Tamer. Let's see if Edgar can find a removal spell here. Looks like just Duress.
Well, that can clear out the Spell Pierce for 1 mana, which if you end up on a mana-tight turn,
could matter.
Could matter.
There is the removal spell, and that is going to do it. Joe's going to pack them up as Lyra carries the day for Edgar.
Not as interesting, maybe, as we kind of hyped the match up to be. Edgar basically just did his thing. Joe stumbled a little bit in both games. Edgar had the answer to the Curious Obsession and just ran away with the game.
Yeah, a bit of a letdown, I'll be honest. I wanted one of those fireworks-filled displays like we saw from Autumn Burchett over at the Mythic Championship. Didn't quite get that here, but still a solid win for Edgar, hoping to push his team onto possibly a 7-0 record. We'll see. That's a nice start, but still Magic to be played. We are going to get you over to another match in just a moment here. Sounds like we're going to be headed to the Modern matchup, and we'll get to see some more of this, as I'm calling it, textbook matchup of Modern. Amulet Titan versus Is It Phoenix.
A classic matchup, really.
Yeah. Here we see we are in the midst of the game. Let's try and figure out exactly where we're at here. I think we're seeing Daryl just take a stroll through Matthew's graveyard. You see Daryl with less mana available than the Is It Phoenix player has. That's never a good sign for the Amulet Titan player.
Yeah, it looks like some Path to Exiles were involved. That's not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a play pattern that people have to get used to is, when you're playing against Azorius Control or something, to just like fetch shock, even if you don't necessarily need the dual land, just because you want to leave the basics in your deck to search out for a Path to Exile. And that's not necessarily something that I would consider doing against Amulet, especially if the Phoenix player is bringing in Blood Moon and also wants to have access to basic island.
Right.
And sure enough, Hoey has 2 Blood Moons in his sideboard.
Yeah, the 2 Blood Moons pretty much standard from these Izzet Phoenix players. You're seeing just very small points of differentiation in these decks at this point. Different numbers of surgical extractions, different numbers of Pyromancer's Ascension. Just little tweaks up and down, but the core of this deck is solid. It's well known, and it's certainly among the best decks in Modern at this point.
For now.
For now.
We expect things to change, but it might take a while.
Jerry Thompson, very much not a believer in Izzet Phoenix's long-term success in this format.
I mean, I love Izzet Phoenix as a deck. It is doing all the things that I want to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it is very flimsy and easily attacked, but we'll see. Pretty big turn there, though.
Yeah, big turn, but a nice answer here. Here's a Summoner's Pact. I would assume that's going to go get Reclamation Sage and answer this Blood Moon with the quickness. Enjoy your time on the battlefield, Blood Moon. It will be brief, but unfortunately for Daryl Ayers, I think I saw a second copy in hand for Matthew Hoey.
Way to ruin it, man.
Yeah, and quite frankly, unless there's another land in hand, that could just be game here.
Well, there's a land, maybe not the land that you need. Okay, cute play. Reclamation Sage to take out the Blood Moon, and then that unlocks the Selesnya Sanctuary, which allows Daryl to play out preemptive Engineered Explosives for 2. With the Summoner's Pact, he imagined that he's going to be a little bit land light in future turns and just wants to get the explosives out now.
Serum Vision's going to go ahead and send 2 lands to the bottom. Maybe there's not a Blood Moon in hand. Maybe that was a scry we were looking at that point, or maybe even a graveyard.
So you did ruin it, but just in the opposite way.
Right. As long as I ruined it. That's always my goal here.
Yeah. That's a good goal.
Nice Thought Scour here from Matthew. Going to go ahead and put an Arclight Phoenix into the graveyard. I would assume we always have the 3rd spell to turn it on, right? That's just the way this deck works. And in fact, we do. Some more scry action, both on top. That's always a scary thing to see on the other side of the battlefield. Here comes another Thought Scour, putting those into the graveyard. It's another Arclight Phoenix, as well as a Faithless Looting.
Hoey cast the Serum Visions.
This deck is terrifying when it's doing its thing. Absolutely terrifying.
Looked at the top card, just laughed to himself.
Yep. Well, there you go. There's a typical explosive Izzet Phoenix endgame. You just get to a point where it feels like you have all the options in the world. Amulet, the onus is very much on the Amulet deck to get ahead of the curve and start doing powerful things early on in the game. Why don't we talk a little bit about the sideboards? We don't necessarily have the graphic for you here, but we can talk about what both players are going to be doing. We've seen this matchup before, so a lot of the same stuff here. Blood Moon is the main plan for the Izzet Phoenix deck in post-board games. Any other wrinkles that Matthews bring to the table here?
Pretty standard with what we've seen. Matt Hoey has 1 Beacon Bolt, the 3rd copy of Surgical Extraction, an Anger of the Gods, 2 Abrade, 2 Dispel, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Blood Moon, 2 Ravenous Trap, 1 Keranos God of Storms, and 1 Shatter Storm. So the counterspells are good, the Blood Moons are good, the Abrades are good, and maybe the Beacon Bolt.
Mm-hmm. I like all those choices. Meanwhile, over on Daryl Ayers' side, we're looking at a sideboard of 1 Engineered Explosives, 1 Ramunap Excavator, Reclamation Sage, Tireless Tracker, Chameleon Colossus, 2 Primal Command, 3 Negate, 1 Tragic Arrogance, and 4 Path to Exile. We talked about this before when we saw World Polium in our feature match area. You want those Path to Exiles. You need the Reclamation Sage. You saw it in that matchup. Key for taking out Blood Moon. The rest of the stuff is kind of going to be up to player preference. I think I'm fine with making sure you have those cards, and then it really depends on how Daryl wants to play this matchup, and I think it could change on the play and draw, too.
Yeah, for sure. I generally like not having as many reactive cards when on the play. You don't want your hand to be just flush with these reactive cards when you're on the play, because you want to be able to take advantage of that tempo boost of going first.
So it sounds like Andrew Tenjum was able to go ahead and win his side of the Death and Taxes versus Golgari depths matchup. That means that this game 3 we're seeing right now is for the entire match. High stakes game here.
Those poor Merit Lage tokens.
Just didn't have their moment in the sun.
Yeah. It's always sad. I don't know.
Do you know if Matthew Dilks has the Jerry T Merit Lage tokens?
I doubt it. I don't make any assumptions. I assume that no one uses them. I think there was a new Merit Lage token in Ultimate Masters.
Why don't you head down there and hook the guy up with one? Come on.
I'm kind of busy, man.
Be a good ambassador. I got this. Don't worry. Go step out for a little bit.
Okay,
I'll cover you.
I don't think the boss would like that.
I will tell you, if there was a viable Squirrel deck currently present in the metagame, I would be running down to the feature match area repeatedly and just making it rain with my tokens in there.
Yeah,
there would be squirrels everywhere.
It'd be like the Santa Claus of Squirrel tokens.
Right.
I believe it.
Right. So I have to say, it's got to be an advantage for this team when it comes down to one game left, because you have 3 very, very competent Amulet players ready to go ahead and weigh in on your match. They all know this deck inside and out. You know, we see other teams. I was down in the feature match area when Miriam, Jim Davis, and Tan and Grace were playing, and Ross kind of asked Jim a question, and Jim was just like, you know way better than I do. Why are you asking me? And he was right, and that's a fine team dynamic to have. But here you have 3 people who are equally in tune with the archetype that's being played right now. Got to be a little bit of an advantage.
And given that they work on the deck together, and even they are now good enough friends that they play together on the same team and everything, you got to imagine that they are playing the deck in the same way too.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Like they agree on sideboard choices and how you sideboard in certain matchups and like what very specific lands that you want to play, which is like a huge decision point when building this sort of deck. And they just end up coming to a consensus on everything.
Yeah.
So you're not going to see too many like team arguments, right? It's going to be Dilks saying like, hey, actually, did you think about this line? And if he's correct, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, never mind, you're right.
All right. I had the chance to talk with Edgar between rounds last round, and we were just talking about what he's got coming up. Mentioned Mythic Championship London is on his schedule, and he's like, yeah, it's nice. I just don't have to test for Modern whatsoever. His deck getting a significant upgrade in the form of the London Mulligan. Obviously, Amulet Titan very happy to have better mulligans. A deck that only needs a few cards to win the game. It's going to be very pleased to look at 7 quite often.
Yeah, you basically get a free Brainstorm plus Shuffle to start the game if you're mulling to 5 or whatever, and that's fine because you only need, like 5 cards basically?
Absolutely, and we've talked at length about how the bounce lands give you some inherent card advantage. So, yeah, I think Amulet players well positioned as we head into London, and Edgar feels the same way.
Well, the big question is how much better do other decks get as a result of the London Mulligan, and are some of the decks that become much stronger also bad matchups for Amulet? And people have raised the concern of like Goryo's Vengeance and all these like turn 2 kill combo decks that weren't consistent enough might actually be consistent now, and it seems like those are probably bad matchups for Amulet, no?
We'll have to see. Goryo's is certainly a tough one. It's kind of like if they can do their thing all on one turn, you really have no meaningful way to interact with them. But you can always adapt. There's Tormod's Crypt, which you have tutorable access to and can play on turn 1, so we'll see if Amulet Titan has to account for that or if they can just do their thing on a more regular basis.
Yeah, of course. But going into the tournament, it's going to be weird because if people do make odd deck building decisions based on, or deck selection decisions, I suppose, based on the London Mulligan rule, you're not necessarily going to know because all these different teams and groups of people who are working together are going to come to their own conclusions, and it might not be the same as your conclusions.
No, very true. Always the problem going into any Pro Tour, right? You never know exactly where the rest of the teams stand.
Right. It's like, I've decided that Goryo's is insane as a result of this, so I'm going to play all this graveyard hate, and people are just like, well, I didn't play a graveyard deck because I thought they were bad, and you're like, what? I don't understand. And they're like, I don't understand. How?
Right. Right. We see it happen all the time. It's crazy how, 2 very intelligent groups of people who are super tuned into the game come to completely different conclusions about what the correct call is.
Mysteries.
Looks like Matthew on a mulligan to 6 as well. There's also this weird tension, too, because while we certainly are conceding that Izzet Phoenix is one of, if not the best deck in Modern right now, it doesn't benefit all that much from the London Mulligan. So we'll see if that brings it back in line. I think Matthew's actually on a mulligan to 5 here.
If anything, Phoenix gets punished by it.
It seems like it.
Because they have 20 cards in their deck that do nothing but draw cards. It's like, they're just like, no, go back to the old rule, like no scry, no nothing, and they would be fine with it. So anytime these blue decks that are very cantrip heavy get a new mulligan rule, it actually makes those sorts of decks worse in comparison to the rest of the field.
That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, that said, I don't think Izzet Phoenix is going anywhere. I expect that it will be heavily represented in London, but I just don't think that it's getting a boost.
That sounds correct. Maybe falls a bit more in line with the rest of the field if it is currently the best possible choice, which, I don't know, I think still open for debate. A lot of people would call me crazy, but...
Not me, Brian.
Okay. As long as you have my back, Jerry, that's all I need.
Always, man.
Going to go ahead and scribe both those to the top. A little scary for the Amulet player. Let's see what Daryl's follow-up is here. I think I see an Amulet there in hand.
And a Coalition Relic. So they've got some decisions to make.
Play is going to be Amulet. It's going to return Tolaria West to hand. Follow-up, Ancient Stirring. It's going to go ahead and look at the top 5 cards of the library, see if we can find some more action there.
Ancient Stirring's not really an action finder in this sort of deck, right?
In most cases, no. Usually just finding mana. Sometimes you have things like Emrakul in post-board games.
Sure.
None here today.
But yeah, out of Tron, it's like, no Ulamog, no Ugin, no Karn,
Right.
please. And this one, you're just like, I found a land.
Well, it can roundabout get you to action because you can find Tolaria West, which becomes a threat via Transmute.
Right, and I would actually argue that Amulet can be considered action in a lot of spots too. Just not usually how you think about it.
So that Amulet did meet an Abrade from Matthew.
And Hoey with the upkeep, Thought Scour myself to mill the Arclight Phoenix that he knew was there from Serum Vision. So getting a little bit of extra value there.
Very nice stuff. Second spell for the turn, going to be a copy of Sleight of Hand.
Training Wheels.
Yeah, you don't like this card, right?
I mean, Sleight of Hand is fine, but you have Opt. I think Opt is stronger when you have Snapcaster Mage in your deck, which granted, Hoey doesn't, so
Okay.
maybe not that big of a deal. But you generally know what you're looking for when you're casting a cantrip. It's not like, oh, this first card is medium, but it could be worse, whereas Sleight, you get to look at both of them immediately. I think with Opt, you can make a more informed decision.
Okay. I could buy that. We did cast our third spell here. Only one Phoenix in the graveyard, but nice to get that clock started. Going to go ahead and pitch that Pyromancer Ascension. We see another player keeping in Pyromancer Ascension in post-board games. I was talking to Pete Ingram between rounds. He's like, the card is just good. I always want it. I am happy to have it in my deck. Been very impressed with the card on the day.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. I mean, this is a big part of Hoey's deck. He has 3 copies and not a lot of win conditions otherwise. So I understand that. And certainly the post-board games go a little longer and they have Path to Exile to answer your actual creatures. And granted, Path to Exile is sort of new, but...
Here's another copy of Amulet. Going to put a Bajuka Bog into play, deal with the graveyard. Here's an Azusa. Going to pick up that Bajuka Bog. And here is our third land drop. Going to exile our own graveyard. And we have another 3-drop. It's a Coalition Relic. Now, Amulet Titan, all the mana in the world, can it find a threat? That's going to be the question.
So why would you Bajuka Bog your own graveyard?
It's interesting.
You just don't want any of your cards to get surgical?
It's the best reason I can come up with. It doesn't cost you anything.
Because you're not doing anything with your graveyard.
Correct. Right? Correct. Yeah, I think just surgical protection is about it. That's a card that certainly shouldn't be in. But look, there's no upside to hitting your opponent again. If it doesn't cost you anything, you may as well take the safest possible play.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like this heads-up play that people might not normally think about.
Right, but someone like Daryl, who's played 10,000 matches with the deck, is just like, yep, this is obvious. I'll certainly do this. Uh-oh.
The mana counters are coming out.
We got some mana counters. That means that usually big things are going to happen.
I mean, with starting the turn with Coalition Relic, Azusa, and Amulet,
Yep.
you would expect things to happen. It takes a single bounce land to maybe return that Tolaria West, too.
Yep.
So you know things are going to happen.
More mana floating. We're going to replay that bounce land now. Guess what's coming back to hand? Bounce land again. One more time. Replay the bounce land. Plenty of mana. Here comes Tolaria West, back in hand. Going to do a little transmuting.
So access to 14 mana total on this turn if Daryl wanted it.
Not bad. Not bad at all.
But this is one of those spots where Dispel against the packs is huge.
And unfortunately, it's there. Dispel going to go ahead, eat that Summoner's Pact.
So Daryl has access to all this mana. Can he do anything else with it?
Engineered Explosives in hand. Going to go ahead and play that onto. Slowing down the clock a bit, but needs to find a threat again.
So no pack to pay for next turn. Plenty of mana available, and just needs to draw a gas card, right?
Mm-hmm.
Engineered Explosives could have taken out the Thing in the Ice and enabled an Azusa attack, but not really relevant in the grand scheme of things. You'd rather just keep that around for if Hoey draws a second copy, he's not able to actually deploy it and start getting to work on that one. So you might as well save this until the original Thing in the Ice is ready to transform.
Correct. There's not many games with Amulet that you win by inches. It's usually a game won by miles. And that 1 point from Azusa, unlikely to matter. Meanwhile, a refreshment on the Thing in the Ice, very relevant. Ayers going to go ahead and put a counter on that Coalition Relic. From this position, there's a lot of live cards in Ayers' deck. There's just 4 Titans themselves. There's more copies of Summoner's Pact. There's more copies of Tolaria West. There's Ancient Stirrings. A lot of the deck becomes live at this point in the game.
Ayers also has that copy of Hornet-Queen that we saw earlier.
Correct. Correct. Another fine draw. Here comes a Thought Scour. Hoey going to target himself. Serum Visions and Sleight of Hand hit the bin. The draw is land.
Yeah, not great. I mean, if you're in Hoey's spot, that's the reverse of what you want to have happen, right? You want to be able to cantrip into more cantrips.
For sure.
Increase the amount of card selection that you actually have.
Ayers going to fall to 8 here. More like a virtual 5 with that Lightning Bolt we know is in hand. Going to play a Forest. Take that counter off. Just a Gemstone Mine in hand. Little tap on the top of the deck there. Uh-oh, it's another Dispel. That's going to close down some outs for Ayers.
But not all.
Not all. Still plenty there. Falling to 5, virtual 2 with Lightning Bolt in hand. This is the key turn for Daryl Ayers. What did we draw? It's another Forest. Does not look good for the Amulet Cabal. Here comes that Arclight Phoenix. Gonna play it slow. No reason to just fire this off now. Never mind. There you go. Lightning Bolt to the face. Wrap it up. Is it Phoenix takes down Amulet Titan again?
Interesting.
Very interesting.
I think